Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first coffee and croissant of the last half term. Obviously, we've had a lovely week. It's felt like it's the 6 weeks holidays with the weather, but just 6 weeks to go. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to take part in our coffee and croissant today. We've got the lovely Jalira here with us for phase 3 and live marking on a tight budget. Now, budget comes to mind, you're thinking about money, but what we mean with tight budget is, as we all know, some subjects have got limited time in the classroom, RS being one of them. And Jalira always manages to have amazing feedback given to her students. And today she's just going to be sharing a bit with us about how she gets around to all those books and how she gives that amazing feedback. So obviously, as we know, excellent feedback can add an extra 8 months progress, and this is something that we want for all of our students. Before I give too much away, I'm going to bring in our expert Jalira, ready for her session. Over to you, Jalira.
Thank you. Okay, hello everybody, thank you for joining us. So mine is live marking on a tight budget, which is phase 3, and by tight budget I mean timing. Okay, so timing is very tight. So why live marking? So obviously Louise has touched upon some of the benefits of live marking. So for me, it's about it reduces teachers' workloads outside of lesson hours, encourages teachers to give feedback. Okay, and it also helps us to make sure that when we give that feedback, we concentrate on certain misconceptions, more aware of misconceptions taking place in the classroom in order to improve those. It allows for a dialogue between teacher and student, which is so important, because most of the time, if you are not giving live marking, it means that students miss out that dialogue about how they need to improve and how to go into the next phase of learning. It gives the students concise, regular feedback, making it easier for them to improve. So firstly, I'm going to be really honest. When we introduced live marking, I wasn't actually sure about it, because my first thought was, well, our lessons are 50 minutes. We see the students once a week. That's from year 7 all the way to year 10, and year 11, we'll see them twice a week. So my first thought was that I will never have any time. And actually, I really did struggle with it, because in my head, I was like, I've got a lot of students to give feedback to. I've got to make sure I go through enough content in the lesson. I've got them to complete an assessment or a key question when it was more from year 7 to year 9, and then I've got to mark it. So I was always rushing around. I'll probably get maybe 2, 3, 4 students, because I'll spend a lot of time trying to engage with them, trying to get them to respond, while obviously really concerned about delivering the content for the lesson. But over time, we worked as an RS team to make improvements to our live marking, and I would say, and now I'm a full advocate for live marking. So I'm going to go through how we were able to ensure that we were giving all students like consistent, concise live marking that allowed for a dialogue with them in order for them to improve. So first things first, target codes in books. This is so important. Now, as you can see for here, on our GCSE textbooks for year 10 and 11, they actually have the RX marking codes. And for year 7 to year 9, we have the target codes stuck into the books. Now, I understand that for lots of subjects, target codes might, evolve, change over time. For the RS department, we worked really hard to ensure we had target codes that could be used for all key assessment questions. This meant that kids actually have a better awareness of the target codes, because they have them at the back or at the back of their books. This also meant that we don't, because before, one of the things we were doing, we were asking kids to write out the target codes. That meant sometimes by the time you gave feedback, a student would have written out the target code, and then would have never had time to actually fully respond, because they spent ages writing that target code. But now I give them the target codes. Most kids actually don't even need to look at the back of their book for the target code, because they know the target code so well, because they're at the back of the book. But I always say to the students, refer to the back of your books. And also when we actually talk to the students about making improvements, and for my year 11s, I will normally say, what was your last target code? Are you still receiving the same target code? They can look at the back of their books and see, okay, I've been receiving, for example, T8 throughout. I need to make sure that I'm no longer receiving that same target code. So if you can, and where you can, have the target codes in the books. So target codes for exam question practice. Now, sometimes, and especially with Key Stage 4 classes, we want to make sure that we spend more than one lesson just giving feedback. We want to go into detail into a key question, especially when we've noticed when we've marked that key question, there's been a lot of issues and misconception. And especially for me, I teach 2 year 10 classes where I've got a double class. So there's about 58 students in each class. Now that means sometimes when you're marking exam questions, you're not always able to mark them completely within the lesson. So what I normally do is I mark them the day before the lesson, but I still ensure that we have the element of live marking taking place in the lesson. So one of the things we do is, first of all, modeling is key. Now, before I give students the target codes that they need to work on in that lesson, and as I said, this lesson will be completely dedicated to live marking and feedback, I will ensure that I model to the students outstanding work. And the outstanding work I model is always the work of other students. So obviously bring up the visualizer when I can. Sometimes it's difficult depending on the classroom I'm in, but making sure you bring up the visualizer. And I basically go through a list of students who I identified had really good positive responses to the exam question. And I go through what the students said. I ask students, we work together in terms of identifying what went well for those students, what did they do well? And sometimes I even asked other students to say, how many marks do you think this student received? By modeling outstanding work, it then makes it easier for me when I ask the students to respond to their target codes. So I'm going to give you an example of something we do within the RS department for our individual classes. So I'm going to give you an example from one of the RS teachers. So you've got the key questions. Feedback sheet for Christians should always forgive. As you can see, as I said before, we have target codes that we always have in the back of the books, but sometimes we have this sheet of paper with new target codes for a particular exam question, and the students will stick this in their book. And what we do in regards of like the foundation of modeling student work, we also make sure that we give students examples. For example, you've got here target 1. How does your piece of evidence actually improve the point you are making? Okay. And I've got an example of someone who doesn't do this. So I've got an example how to improve. I've also, you can see, we've got excellent work by, okay? So this is also about praise. And I'm gonna talk a lot about behavior for learning and praising students. So we've got here students who have praised. So we've got, for well-reasoned work, for having evidence. So students are also fully aware of what other students did well. We've got common spag errors, so working about misconceptions. We do get marks for spelling, grammar, and punctuation in the RS exam, and sometimes kids make mistakes with key terms in terms of spelling them. So we've got here the common spag errors and in common general misconceptions, but always examples on how to improve. And as I've said before, how the reason modeling is key, how to improve also been addressed when we model outstanding work at the start of the lesson. Okay, so one of the things, I'm putting forward, and I hope it's clear, is that sometimes you do have to adapt target codes in order to ensure that you give students more detailed feedback in terms of how to improve on particular exam questions. So the next thing I want to talk about is let students take responsibility for marking. So for me, this is really, really, really important. I like to put ownership on the students for the marking. Now, there are staff students who I always go to in the lesson, and they're the students, when we start completing a key assessment question that I would always, work with, spend a bit more time with. But to other students in the class, I always say to them, okay, today we are live marking, right? I need to make sure over the next 2 lessons, everybody's book is live marked. So in the next lesson, I would say, put your hand up if you had your question live marked. If you've not, you'll need to be live marked for today's lesson. Also ensure with some students, I would then say to me, if you were able to feedback, if you responded to your target codes, I then in this lesson need to go back and mark the work that you responded to make sure that you have made the appropriate improvements. So it's really, really important that you let students take responsibility for live marking. My students will always put their hand up and say, Miss, I've already responded. You need to make sure you come back and check my work. So embed live marking into schemes of work. That's really important. As you can see here, we have in-class questions. Because we only teach them once a week, we always have in our tracker in-class questions, and they tend to be the 12-mark essay question. This means for year 9 to 11, this means that because it's embedded in our schemes of work, we all know in the department that everybody has to ensure that they have actually had that students complete that question, and that question is live marked. And especially for year 11, on their folders, their lesson folders, they would have on their lesson folders all the marks they've received for each in-class question, as well as what target codes they received for the in-class question, to ensure that they understand next time that that's something they need to work on. Okay, behavior for learning. So I'm going to quickly go through behavior for learning. The reason I want to talk about behavior for learning is that one of the reasons I've become a massive advocate for live marking is that I think it's a brilliant way to actually embed behavior for learning in your classroom. Why? Because one of the things I always do, because I live mark students' classroom, I use it as a tool in order to engage students. I feel this particularly has worked with my year 10 boys, because I always remind them on the last assessment question, you got a 10 out of 12. You received 8 out of 12, because they know I'm constantly live marking and I'm constantly updating them. I'm able to say, you know what, you need to engage and focus a bit more in today's lesson, because you're currently working at 6 out of 12 and we should be, you know, aiming higher than that. And that's the ownership that I have of that classroom, because I'm fully aware how each student is doing, because I'm constantly live marking their work. So key takeaways: embed within the schemes of work, have target codes which are can be consistently used, make sure students take responsibility for their work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jalira. Obviously, Jalira brought up some real key themes in that, covering many areas. Like this spoke about, we know about EDI, we've got our 4 phases. But so this was on phase 3, but Jalira spoke about thinking about your modelling in phase 2. She spoke about your schemes of work. She spoke about behaviour for learning and students having real ownership of their live marking. And if you go and see Jalira teach, which is something that I urge everyone to go and do, you'll really see that, especially when she's got the large classes, that students really take ownership and are asking her, Miss, can you come and look at my response, please? Can you come and read this? This is something that we need to make sure that we're all embedding in our classroom, because it will just make us so much more effective live markers. So thank you so much for everyone for coming to watch today. Thank you to Jalira for her lovely session on live marking, and I hope everyone has a great Friday.